Welcome to the PHP Podcast. I'm Mike.
And this is Orlando, and we're on episode 141.
141. Yeah. And this episode is unique, but not unique in the sense that we're doing a level up review. So if you're
It's been a while.
Yeah, if you're new to PHP Podcast, typically our Wednesday episodes are like what's going on in the reselling world, what we're reselling, things that are happening like that, or some kind of themed episode, something about reselling. Sundays, a lot of times we have interviews, but we occasionally do these book reviews where we take a popular book and we read through it and figure out what are some of the principles we can apply to our lives, what can we apply to reselling. And so this is one of these level up reviews. And today we are reviewing a very popular book, which is Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill.
Yeah. I mean, that was, we threw out 4 options, right, on Instagram, and this is one that people voted for. And so we'll see where we land towards the end of this episode. Did you want to add something?
Yeah, I mean, we're going to go into lots of detail about like our personal opinions about some of those things.
Well, that's just what this is. It's a review.
Well, yeah, it's a review. But the meat of what we're going to be doing is trying to pick out the principles that apply, what can be actually useful and applied in order to better your life, better reselling. And I'm going to just say, like, right up front, just for transparency's sake, there are some concepts in here, some things that I feel are very helpful and will be very applicable to just reselling and mindset in general. But there are also a lot of things in here that I disagree with, and I think Orlando too, unequivocally just oppose. And so I don't want it to seem like, hey, we're saying this is a book that we agree with. We're just reviewing the book and saying, hey, what can we take out of it? And then what is...
Well, and it's a good lesson. I mean, it's kind of one of those things that you should always be open to reading other people's thoughts, right? Other people's ideas, right? And then you can make the decision because there's a lot of value, right? And it doesn't matter what background you come from. All different backgrounds can bring some kind of value, right? And we know that Napoleon Hill's book is a very, very popular book, right? For entrepreneurs, business, real estate. So I had high expectations for this book. I think there are some takeaways, and then there's some things that, as a historian, I kind of have I take issue with, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. So stay tuned for the whole episode.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, and just really quick, just jumping on that idea of like reading things from different perspectives. Even if you read something, you're like, you know what, I didn't get tons of value from this, or I didn't think it was so great. One thing that I really liked, and we'll get to when we get to chapter 5, which he talks about education kind of, is this idea of always learning, right? Constantly learning, constantly growing. And one of the best ways to do that is to read things from different perspectives, different ideas, and maybe you don't always agree with what you're reading, but what you're doing is you're strengthening your mind. You're learning how to think deeply about things, and then learning how to strengthen your own arguments and beliefs and stuff. So I think this is going to be really helpful. And today we are doing Think and Grow Rich. So
we've never given such a defense about what we're about to do.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important just because It is what it is. We're real. We're relevant.
No, we're going to keep it real in this episode. And I hope that I should have just ended when you ended. But I wanted to add one more thing is that those of you that listen to us for a long time, we always want to keep it real, right? And so we may disagree. So in the comments below, like if there's anything you're like, no, what are you talking about? Or is there anything you really agree with? Let us know. We'd like to know. We always engage. I love the conversations that we have in the comments. So let us know below.
Yeah.
And hit that thumb button, the thumbs up.
And try and keep it civil. I mean, Orlando and I, our opinions and beliefs are just one view, right? So if you hold to different views and you're like, no, I agree completely with what he says, that's perfectly fine. You can make your own decision. So this is just where we stand on things. And I think there actually were a lot of things that I got out of this. And I think a lot of it is similar to some of the books we've read in the past. Mm-hmm. And I think the reason why is a lot of the kind of influential self-help, grow yourself type books get a lot of their concepts from this. This is one of the original how to kind of focus your life in a certain direction. And so it's written at a level that's very easy to understand by the common person. So it's not like deep psychological, but it's a lot of the foundational things that we've talked about already, but it's kind of nice getting from the actual source. And so our first chapter is called The Power of Thought.
Okay. So what are your thoughts about the power of thought?
It was interesting. So basically, and we try and do this with all of our books, is we try and sum up what's the key concept. And there's a few concepts in this book, but the primary concept that Hill provides here is you can kind of control your destiny or control what happens in your life based off the way you think. And I do think there's some validity to that. And with a lot of qualifications, when I say that, I don't think that you have ultimate control and you can like change destiny, as it were, if that's even something you believe in. But what I do think is if you have a focused mindset, if you're generally optimistic about things, then even when hardships come, it's easier to roll with the punches as opposed to if you're always negative, then things that might even be good, you might not enjoy. So there's a lot of truth to the way you think about things. It has a big influence on the way you interpret the things that happen to you. Does that mean you can control the things that happen to you? Not necessarily, but it does allow you to interpret those things in various ways.
Yeah. And, his story, that he has a lot of stories, tells a lot of stories throughout the book. And so the first one is about, I believe his name is Edwin Barnes, right?
Yep, Edwin Barnes.
And he's an individual that was looking, well, he wasn't looking, but
he wanted to work with Thomas Edison.
Correct. But ultimately that was his goal, right? That was his end game, right? That he was going to work for Thomas Edison, but he actually wanted to be a partner with Thomas Edison, which happens later on. Mm-hmm. Right. But it's interesting because on page now, here's the interesting, we're all in this weird, like my book isn't going to get delivered till like May 1st.
Yep.
so
we did PDF and
we're both I'm on a Kindle right now.
Yeah, and I listened to the Audible version and then using like a PDF Kindle version. And we may even have different versions of the book. So I read the original. I think you may or may not have the original also.
Oh, by the way, if you read the original version, I don't know if they cleaned it up. And now it was a different time, right? Yeah. So there's a lot
it's not going to be politically correct.
Correct. There's a lot of different language. So again, you got to be willing to sift through stuff to find the truth, right? But so I can't give page numbers because I don't know which one you have. I don't know what our listeners have. Like,
we'll just highlight some main quotes.
So he gives a story about Edwin Barnes, right? Edwin Barnes shows up and meets with Edison, and that he basically said that the appearance was important, right? Him going, right? He already had to go on a train. He had to go through all these obstacles. He showed up with Edison. And it's not that he tried to convince Edison about anything. It's that he thought about what he wanted to do with Edison.
Yeah. And so basically he says, like, you can actualize, like, the thing is going to happen the way you think about it, right? We hear of sports athletes saying the same thing, like, visualize the shot over and over and over. And then when it goes to happen, you're going to make that shot because you've seen it in your head. And so he's basically applying that to everything. Like, if you visualize, like, I will get this job, if I think that I'm going to be received well, and you think it enough, and he goes into a lot of depth later on, kind of the key concept is you can control what happens to you by thinking it, that because the way he thought is where it turned out. And in fact, it says this: Barnes literally thought himself into a partnership with the great Edison. He thought himself into a fortune. He had nothing to start with except for the capacity to know what he wanted and the determination to stand by that desire until he realized it. And so one thing I think, kind of a philosophy I have with this, because I know there's a lot of people who stand by this, like, you have to have one desire, and if you have that desire, like, you can reach your goal. And I think there's an element of truth, and there's a difference between causation and correlation. And I think
that's exactly what I was thinking. Really? Exactly what I was thinking.
One thing that I would say, the way I would define this, that I think for me is the more truthful way of saying it, would be, you have to be singularly focused in something in order to achieve success in it, but being singularly focused in something doesn't guarantee the success. So I don't think there's anybody who's been the top 1% of whatever their field is without that being their all-consuming passion in life and focus in life. So I think there's some validity there, but I also think that there are many, many more people who have had just as much singular focus and desire and didn't make it, right? I think sports and music are great examples, that there's no athlete who made it to the top without devoting their entire life to getting there. But there's a lot of people who've devoted their entire life to getting there and genuinely think and believe they'll get there and just don't. And so I think that it's true. If you're not, like, focused in almost an unusual, unique way to achieve maximum success, to make it to that top 1% of something, you're not going to make it there. But just because you're doing that, I don't think guarantees you make it there.
I feel bad that right off the bat we're just like, yeah, I don't know about that idea. But it's valid. I mean, there is. Well, I'll give you an example, and he's probably listening, so I'm sorry, but a good friend of mine, like, his goal was like, hey, I'm gonna reach a certain level, I'm gonna invest in all these stocks, like, things are gonna be good, and he invested in stocks right before the pandemic, and lost all kinds of money. right? So he thought it. He was thinking about it. It was his sole determination. Like, this is what's going to happen. This is what I'm going to do, right? But Black Swan scenario changes all that, right? And that's life. Like, that's reality. Like, I wish I could think things into existence,
yep.
right? I mean, because who's not a daydreamer,
yeah.
right? And I've daydreamed plenty. Now, I can't say there hasn't been times where like I thought about something and I imagined myself doing something and next thing you know I am, but I don't believe it's because I thought about it. I think it's because all the hard work that I did to get from point A to point B, and I understood that, hey, if I put in that work, I'll get there, right? And so there's kind of interesting messages in this book. And I know right now we're probably contrarian as far as what many people thought wrong.
Yeah. And I think, and the hard part too is, and again, this is just our opinion. So if you full-heartedly like follow into the, like, you can kind of will the universe to follow your path. I mean, if that's your belief, like, we're not saying like you can't have that view.
Maybe it's because we're just so ignorant that it doesn't happen to us.
Yeah. So, but you know, I mean, he goes on to say basically that you can't actually gain riches until you have the state of mind that attracts it, like that your state of mind attracts certain things. And again, I think with this, why it's hard, because it's always hard to argue the counterfactual, right? Like, if somebody's successful, you can say it's because they did these things. And if somebody wasn't successful, you could say it's because they didn't do it well enough. But you never know, like, the counterfactual, right? Like, you don't know what could have happened if, right? So it's difficult to prove these things. And there's always going to be anecdotal evidence to prove, and there's going to be anecdotal evidence to disprove. But what I would say is, like, okay, this idea of attracting riches, I think to me it's far-fetched, but I understand the concept and like the psychology behind, okay, if I want to have happier people around me, right? And so I'm going to think about, like, I'm just going to be a happy, positive person. Well, there's psychology behind the fact, like, if you go and you're talking with people and you're smiling and you're being optimistic about the things you say, then they're going to return that, right? Like, we talked about that with mirroring, right? And so you might say, like, hey, I'm always smiling and I'm just going to, like, put positive vibes out there, or however, like, you want to, you know, articulate that or view that. And there's going to be a certain amount of, I guess, I don't know whether it would be like you attract positivity back, or if that positivity could be like contagious. Like, hey, you know, if my fellow coworkers are negative, but every time I come around, I'm just so positive, and then they start being more positive. There is an element of truth to, like, there is an attractiveness to positivity and negativity. Both of them are contagious, right? But I don't know if I can, like, desire money enough to have money come to me. And in fact, we'll talk later on. He kind of talks about, you know, the like, you don't have to necessarily work hard for it, but then in other parts, it's like you got to work hard. It's like, if you think about it enough, if it's what you're putting out there and it's what you realize, and that's, you're ready for it to happen, then it's going to happen. Then it doesn't take hard work. And I think that kind of goes against a lot of what PRSL Podcast stands for, is because we do believe, like, hard work pays off. And of course there is an element of working smarter and not harder.
It has to be the right hard work.
Right. Yeah.
Like, just to work isn't going to be enough.
Yeah. Moving rocks from one side of a room to another is not going to be helpful. But so it's not just the hardest worker wins, but making it to the top of anything takes hard work and dedication. And so there is an element of, like, yeah, you do need to be dedicated. You do need to be focused and have this singular mindset.
Yeah. And you know, it's interesting because later on, he says Barnes literally thought himself into a partnership with the great Edison, right? And we're talking about Thomas Edison, the great inventor. If you remember from your history class, the light bulb.
This is the quote I gave.
Am I rereading the exact same quote? Okay, sorry. Well, see, we highlight the same things, right? But you know, but there's that point A to point B. I'm just going to reiterate. He thought himself into a fortune. Like, he didn't think himself into a fortune. Like, the idea was there. Right? He had nothing to start with except the capacity to know what he wanted and the determination to stand by the desire until he realized it. Okay, you just said all that. All right. Now,
here's a famous one that you see in memes all the time, right? Have you seen memes of this?
Which one?
Of the 3 feet from gold?
Oh, no, I don't. Okay, I'm about to read, but go ahead.
No, I see how you were there, so I was going to let you.
Okay, let me read it real quick. So he goes from there and he talks about, there's a story of this miner that they were mining gold for a long time, right? And they were making money and then it just stopped. But if they had just gone 3 more feet, they would have killed it, right? And the next person that, you know, took up the mine, they ended up very wealthy. So the quote is, one of the most common causes of failure is the habit of quitting when one is overtaken by temporary defeat. Every person is guilty of this mistake at one time or another.
Yeah. This is, I've seen many memes or many Instagram posts on this kind of thing, of this idea of like somebody like in a pickaxe in a mine, and then they like put it down and they're like, I give up, and they're walking away, and literally just inches away is like what they're looking for. And that is a truth. Like, you don't want to give up too soon. But one of the things that I think is a little scary with something like this is, and I recently read a book by an author I trust a lot and I esteem highly, and he kind of said similar things of like, don't have a plan B, but he qualified that with and I thought it was very unique way of putting it, but you're not saying you're not going to adapt or change. And I think that's a mindset that is more helpful, is don't give up, but there's a difference between not giving up and not having a plan B, and being so focused you're not willing to adapt. Because that's a problem too, is you could be so focused on something that's the wrong path to go down. And instead of saying, you know what, I'm focused on being a successful reseller that sells used electronics. Okay. And you're working on it and you're failing. There's nothing to source in your area. And you're like, but I'm never going to give up on this. And you keep going. And you could have like pivoted a little bit and been like, you know what? Clothes was my market. And if you're so focused and not like, well, I don't want to have a plan B. I don't want to give up on this. Or maybe reselling, you found something else, you could have made more money. Like, well, this real estate opportunity opened up, but you know what? I'm going to make it as a reseller. But if things are moving, like I like the idea of, you have a target, you have to have a target or you're never going to reach your goals. But your target throughout life is going to shift. You have kids, you get married, your job, your full-time job, you get fired from, like anything can happen. And your target should be willing to change, but you shouldn't like be with the target with a plan B behind you. Does that make sense? Like,
no, I mean, he talked, I mean, well, I think we're jumping a little bit. He talks about, he doesn't say his name, but Cortez, right? There's a famous story of Cortez when he landed.
Burn the ships.
Yeah. Burn the ships behind you, like no turning back, conquering Montezuma and all that stuff. Right. And I think there's something to be said about that. I would say myself, and I want to get back to the miner story, but as a reseller, when you go full time, I think there's value in that. I think about right now, like with the pandemic that's happening. It's so crazy that we're still saying that. Can't wait to be done. So when things really started going bad initially, I was like, and I had mentioned this in another podcast. Do I need to get another teaching job? Do I need to pick this up? Do I need to find ways? And I was like, nope, like this is what I'm doing, and I'm going to make this happen. And I'm all for the better. Like, sales have not been this great since Q4, and actually things are going really well right now, right? So I think when you leave a little bit of a crack for an option, and I'm not saying don't have a savings, I'm not saying, don't take precautions, but I do think there's some value to not having a backup plan. I know that sounds crazy.
Yeah, I agree with that. Like, don't have the like, I'm going to try this, but if it doesn't work, I'm going to do this. Like, and you should be smart. Like you should have like, I'm going to try really hard to get elected as whatever. I'm going to run for mayor of my city or whatever it is you're doing. And I'm going to put all of my focus on it, and I'm going to work towards achieving that. But I want to make sure that if that doesn't happen, like I'm not burning all of my life savings on it, right? Like I can fall back on something. But at the same time, if you go into like, I'm going to run for mayor, but if that does, and you already have in your mind the excuses to quit, then you're going to quit. Right. And I think that's the idea, is like, don't give yourself the excuse ahead of time. I'll quit if, so don't give yourself the quitting excuses ahead of time, because otherwise you'll quit. Go for it. But if things change and adapt, be willing to adapt with it.
Agreed. Now, going back, sir, let me read it real quick. He said they sold the machinery to a junk man for a few $100s and took the train back home. Some junk men are dumb, but not this one. He called in a mining engineer to look at the mine and do a little calculating. The engineer advised that the project had failed because the owners were not familiar with the fault lines. His calculations showed that the vein would be found just 3 feet from where the Darbys had stopped drilling. That exactly where it was found. The junk man took millions of dollars in ore from the mine because he knew enough to seek expert counsel before giving up. And I think there's a very important principle in there, right? There's two. One is, just because something hasn't worked for someone doesn't mean it's not going to work for you, right? There's maybe, like you said, there's a pivot point, or maybe there's something that person missed. And then there's another one of seeking counsel.
Yeah, that's good. That's
right?
Good.
I mean, a lot of you listen to PRSO podcast because we know a little bit, right? But there's others in the community that know a lot more, right? So just because something's working doesn't mean that everything that you're doing is wrong. Maybe there's just one thing that somebody that knows more than you can guide you in the right direction, and it can pivot your whole business. or it can pivot your marriage, or it can pivot your life. I mean, pivot your child rearing. They say child rearing, child raising, whatever you want to call it. That's a real word, but it's old school.
Old school.
Right?
We're reading the OG version of the book, so that's...
That is 1937. But whatever you're thinking about, like, don't throw it away just because you weren't able to seek expert counsel before doing, especially when it's a very drastic move, especially when it's reselling. Like, if you've been doing reselling for a while and you're not making sales, ask somebody, ask us, DM us, hey, Orlando, I have all these listings. I'm only getting, a sale every few days. What is going on? I see, and then maybe something, because I've had it before where people ask me and I say, well, maybe you should do this. And then they come back to me a week later. They're like, Orlando, yeah, that's it. Like, that's what was missing. And not saying there's anything great about me. I've just done this a little bit longer than you. Right. And so, and for us all the time, I go to people that are experienced resellers and go, listen, I got this inventory here. How would you make it happen? Or I've been sitting on this. I don't know what to do. What do you think? And I've listened to their suggestions and it's worked.
Yep, that's good. And that kind of leads us into the next chapter, which is desire. And this one, he gives a very specific 6-step plan. And there's some stories we'll talk about a little bit, kind of how this all works together. But he gives a 6-step plan specifically on making money. And the 6 steps go like this. First, he says to fix in your mind the exact amount of money you desire to achieve, right? So, I want to make $1 million. I want to have, and we hear similar things with like 10X rule and things like that, right? Like, have a set goal. Then second is determine exactly what you're willing to do, to commit to do to receiving that amount of money. So I want to make $1 million by reselling, right? Then it says next, specify an exact date by when you want to achieve it. All right, I want to make $1 million by reselling in 5 years.
But see, I think those are very valuable.
Yeah, they're valuable. Fourth, create a plan and take the first steps immediately. Okay, so I want to make $1 million by reselling in 5 years. And to do that, I need to list X amount of items per day. The next step is, and then describe your desire in a clear and concise sentence. So make it one very specific sentence. And finally, read this the sentence out loud twice daily. He says once in the morning, once when you go to bed, and just have it focused and set in your mind. And I think that's very big on like the Grant Cardone, like I will have X amount of apartment buildings by this date. And I think that writing down your goal, saying it a couple times a day, so that's your focus. And he specifically says, say these things as if it's already happened. It's not just like I will, but like I've made $1 million by this date. Like, so, and part of it is this specifically is you create that to happen because your thoughts, I would maybe say that your thoughts allow you to take the actions to make it happen. So I definitely think there's a lot of value here. I think there's tons of value in writing down goals, being specific, and having that target to reach.
Well, but it's focus.
Yeah, focus.
Right. Ultimately, it's focus, because one of the big issues, I mean, I share this all the time openly, is that I kind of just go with things. Mm-hmm. Right. And I would say in reselling, I do have goals. Like who was it that asked? Did I share, or somebody asked that, what does reselling look like for you from this point? Like, what do you plan? Or somebody, it was on an IG Live. Hey, what is your plan as a result of this pandemic, as a result of everything going on and business still moving? And, for me, it's, hey, I want to move to a larger property. I want to have my storage on my property. Like, I don't want to have to rent from anybody else. So that's a tangible goal. My tangible goal is, I hate throwing it out there, but it's a year from now, right? A year from now, I want to be in a place where I'm looking and I can move into that. But that's based on a lot of things, like real estate has to go down in price, right? It's reselling has to hit a certain level. But if I have all those written down and I'm checking those boxes, it's more likely I'll achieve that goal than if I just willy-nilly just go, well, I'm gonna just keep making sales and hopefully eventually I'll land there.
Yeah, I mean, because honestly, like we've talked about this in the past, like there is occasionally elements of luck, but like we talked about with Richest Man in Babylon, it's more about being willing to seize opportunities because luck, I mean, it's one of those things like, yeah, there are people who it's like, they're just doing their thing and they come across some property and they find a person who they know who's willing to sell it for super cheap. Like occasionally that happens and people do jump on those opportunities. But you're right. If you are saying like, if that is what you legitimately want, I want a bigger property, I want storage on the property, I want these things, then will you necessarily get it? Maybe yes, maybe no. But your chances of achieving that are significantly higher than if you didn't even think about that at all. A year from now, 5 years from now, if you had no desire to have that happen, then the chances of it happening are almost nothing. Whereas if it's your desire and your focus and every day you're taking steps to reach it, the chances of that happening are significantly higher because you've got a target. I mean, I think that's probably one of the best takeaways from this book, and it's in so many others too. It's just that idea, like, you have to be specific about what you want. And I don't think that, like I said earlier, I don't think that just wanting those things enough makes it happen. You have to take the right actions, and it still might not work. I mean, I know of a person who they dedicated their entire life, like a family who's dedicated their entire life so that their daughter can make it to the Olympics as a figure skater, right? And they worked really, really hard. I mean, literally homeschooled, skated for hours and hours a day, was an incredible figure skater. And because of some injuries and just because of, I mean, was probably in the top 10% of figure skaters ever, or that you know, at the time, but still not enough to make it into the Olympics, right? And so just because you want it doesn't mean it happened. But if she would have never been desired to do it, she would have never made it, you know? So it's like desiring it doesn't make it happen, but it allows you to get there. So you've got to have a target. And so that goes, I think, writing down your goal. There's nothing wrong with that. Now, I don't think saying a specific amount of money is going to make that money come to you, but I think it gives you a focus that you can start moving towards that money, if that makes sense.
And, you know, while we're saying this, like, if you disagree with it, let us know. Like, have you become rich as a result of implementing that philosophy? I'd like to know. You know what I mean? I mean, we see it everywhere, right? And we know from the some of the self-help gurus that they claim this to be true, right? And maybe some of you do too, and maybe it's helped you. We just want to know, right? We're always willing to learn. So when we're here, like, you know, pushing and prodding and trying to figure this out, it's part of it is like, okay, let's be real about this. Let's investigate this. Let's see how true this is. And that's why we'd love to hear from you guys and what your thoughts are on this. All right. So it's interesting because he mentions, am I still in chapter 1? You're already in chapter 2, aren't you?
Yep.
Okay. So
we're almost 30 minutes in. So if we're on chapter 1 still.
This always happens to our books, but it's okay. All right. So it goes to the plan, right? Write out a clear plan, read a written plan. Hey, listen, there's something powerful. I wanted to add to what you're saying about reading stuff out loud, right? There is psychological fact behind it. Now, not psychological fact that if I keep saying I will be a millionaire, that I'll be a millionaire. But, you know, whether you're dealing with self-esteem issues, whether you're dealing with, you know, issues of that you're recovering through therapy, whether it's, you know, trying to establish goals, like, it does help you see things how they really are.
Yeah.
Right. So, you know, if you're just going like, hey, you know, I'm never going to achieve this goal. But if you have it written down like, hey, I was able to do this by this time. Hey, I've already made this net income. I've already reached it. And you verbalize, they definitely do help. I mean, self-talk is a real thing. I'm not taking away from that, but it's the actualization component that I think we're struggling with a little bit. Am I safe to say that?
Yeah. I mean, I don't even know if it's the application, because I think there's a fair amount where I agree with, like, if you take the right steps, like, for instance, towards the end, he makes this comment. I don't even know if it's towards the end of this chapter, but he says,
we have the same thing highlighted.
Oh, are we
going to read this right here?
I'll read it. So,
okay.
The steps call for no hard labor. And this goes back to that idea that I was saying, like, I don't want to ever, we're very big on not, like, get rich quick.
Maybe we have it wrong. Maybe we're working too hard.
I don't think so. I mean, we might upset some listeners by saying this, but I don't think we're in a bad place by saying, whatever you want to do, you can be passionate about it. You can have fun with it. You can be very successful, but real success does take hard work. Now, you can enjoy that hard work, but it takes hard work. This says, so the steps call for no hard labor. They call for no sacrifice. They do not require one to become ridiculous or credulous. To apply them calls for no great amount of education, but the successful application of these 6 steps does not call for sufficient sufficient imagination to enable one to see and to understand that accumulation of money cannot be left to chance, good fortune, and luck. I agree with that. One must realize that all who have accumulated great fortunes first did a certain amount of dreaming, hoping, wishing, desiring, and planning before they acquired money. And I agree with that part. Like, but I think the big part of that is there's some desiring, but there's also planning. And I think you have to implement that. And I think some people will take principles from this and maybe I'm not being fair by saying this, and just focus on the no hard work. All I've got to do is dream about it. But I think dreaming is a step to planning and action.
But there's so many dreamers. I mean, let's be real. Like, I still know guys that I can go back home and they're still dreaming. Right? They're 40 years old like I am, and it's as if we're still in high school.
Yeah. And it's because they don't implement the last part, which is actually planning and then action. Like, you've got to do those things too.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, now, I don't know. I struggle with this because I'm thinking about different things. I'm thinking about Michael Jordan. Like Michael Jordan, the famous story, he got cut from the sophomore team and he went and he practiced, right? Dominic Wilkins, I'm talking about basketball stories, but anybody, Will Smith or The Rock, or you bring all these people that have been motivational. Like, I haven't known many that have just said like, yeah, I just kept thinking about it and I just kept going. I just kept thinking about it and it happened. Like, I haven't personally read a testimony like that.
Yeah. And I do think though, like, to try and understand the mindset of, again, it goes back to, you're not going to reach that success unless that is your entire focus. Like, all of those people, the reason they got where they were is they refused to be average. They refused to give up. They refused. And it goes back to like, don't have a plan B. That's their entire focus. But I think for every Michael Jordan story, for every Rock story, there's significantly more people who, and just to be fair, gave everything, worked just as hard and weren't successful. And so I think that the exception doesn't always prove that it's a fact, right? And I don't think those people could make it unless they had that. So if you want to be a musician, you need to be just absolutely 100% focused, and it has to be your entire drive and life, or you'll never make it in that industry and make it to the top. But I think there's so many people who desire and genuinely work, and I almost feel like there's a pressure of the people who fail at that. Then they can almost feel like, I didn't, and he talks about in the next chapter, like faith, I didn't have enough faith. I didn't try. I didn't think enough about it. I don't want it to seem like it's that. And I do think that there's a certain element of like, your thoughts can change the way you interpret the world and how you focus. But I don't think that just by like speaking it into existence, and if you didn't do it, is because you didn't have enough faith or you didn't have enough.
But I think this requires faith.
Yeah.
You need to have faith. If you want this, I mean, not saying that, I don't know, but to make this happen, to fit into this perspective, it requires a lot of faith. It requires faith as much as I would say any religion. I think I would probably say it's a religion in itself, right? Because to go from point A to point,
belief system. It's a worldview. It's what it comes down to.
Yeah, you have to believe that it is true. And so again, maybe we're off because we're struggling with that part. I don't know, but I think that is a very key component. And he talked about that, about faith. Do you want to jump into that chapter?
Yeah. As we jump into that chapter, and with that desire right before that, we'll just give brief example of that. Is he gives an example of his son who's born without ears. His son was deaf. And I want to say
hold on. Let's talk about social media real quick before we jump into that one. All right. Hey, if you haven't had a chance yet, you can follow us. I hope you still follow us after this Level Up review.
People are like, unsubscribe.
We are Pure Hustle Podcast on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook. And not everything that we drop on there is as heavy as this Level Up review discussion.
Yeah.
We are very reseller focused, but we like to talk about a lot of different things. You can also find us at Pure Hustle Cast on Twitter. You can always follow us on YouTube if you're listening to the podcast. Hit that notification in case, and sometimes we do drop other things that are not on the podcast. And you can always give us a call, 619-738-1170, 619-738-1170. Hey, if you have something that you want to share about what we're talking about right now, let us know and we may play it on air, right? I'd love to, go full circle on it. Is it full circle or come back? Sure. 180, something like that. All right.
We'll circle back.
Circle back. There you go. And you can always shoot us an email, purespodcast@gmail.com. By the way, I know some of you have emailed and we haven't gotten back to you. We're working through it. I mean, we have messages all the way from Facebook to Instagram to TikTok to the voicemail. It's busy. So we will be getting back to you. Thanks so much. Thank you to the guys that have bought shirts. We've had shirts selling during this. We haven't even asked anyone. So thank you guys.
They're super soft.
They are. And what's the other part? Oh yeah, 619-738-1170, 619-738-1170. You give us a call. And the biggest way you could always help us is by writing a review on iTunes. That does a lot for us, especially when you write out a nice detailed one. We have some great ones on there. And so really appreciate all the help you've given us.
Yeah, absolutely. So just quickly, and I know that I only want to talk about this for a few seconds because I don't want to beat a dead horse on this, right? Is that okay?
We haven't. What are you talking
just
about?
the his child who was born deaf without ears. You can tell he believes in what he believes, but he makes this comment that like when his child was born, he refused to accept what the doctor said, and he like, my son will hear. And I think there is an absolute great mindset to have if you have any kind of obstacle in your path, whether it's a handicap or disability or anything that makes life where you've got more obstacles to overcome. There is absolutely nothing wrong with saying, I will overcome this, whatever it takes. Now, I also think that there is a fine line, and this isn't just like a health thing, but like with every aspect of your life, between like determination and delusion. And I think the hard part is like his child and medical professionals and his teachers were recommending like the child learn sign language. The child could communicate well. And he refused. He said, my child will never learn sign language because he's going to live a normal life. He will hear. And eventually the anecdotal story that gets told here is they eventually find electronic hearing devices that help his child to hear somewhat. And he attributes it to the belief. But I think the hard part is the determination that my child will live a normal life, quote unquote, and will hear. That kind of determination, I think, and this is just my opinion, is actually detrimental. I don't think there's anything wrong with saying, here's the obstacles that you are going to have to face in your life. You're going to like learning sign language is a way to be able to communicate. And by withholding that from the child in order to say, but my faith is enough, it actually hurt the child because the child wasn't able to communicate in ways that are set up and designed so that people who are hearing impaired can, communicate. I mean, that's so I just want to say, like, try and find that line between determination. I will live a life that is to the fullest, but I'm not going to be delusional. I'm not going to refuse the things that are actually going to help me overcome these obstacles because I think that something that might be impossible will happen. Does that make sense?
No, it does. Now, to be fair to the author, it's a different time.
A different time, true.
Right? So it's kind of like I was, it's interesting. My son and I were talking the other day, and we're in a different place where back then, like if you weren't considered like normal, whatever, like you could be institutionalized or you wouldn't have access to education. So it's a different time. But I wonder like how much he missed out on his son's life. Right? With that inability to, because it wasn't until he was like in college and so I don't know, it made me sad.
Yeah. I mean, I think of like the perfect example. And I recently read a book that I think is good on this idea of like having, and he mentions this later, of almost having like heroes that we follow. And I think that's good. I think in our society, we have to have the right kinds of heroes. Or the reason I teach literature is because even though these are fake stories, like we can take elements of characters or the idea, themes, and stories and say like, these are things worth imitating. These are values, or these are, and I might not live up to them perfectly, but I want to look like a piece of this and a piece of that. And we can kind of have heroes that help focus our mindset. And I think it's good when we look at somebody like Helen Keller and we say like, this is a hero. This is a person who had to overcome extreme obstacles and did overcome so many of those obstacles and lived an incredibly full life because they were willing to overcome those obstacles.
She became a leader of the Socialist Party. And with the communication she was able to do.
Right, exactly.
Think about,
but imagine though, if it was like, I'm not going to teach my child how to do sign language because my child will see and hear. Like that would be terrible.
Well, that's what I'm saying is idea that, I think Helen Keller is a hero in her own right for the ability to be able to communicate the way that she did, right? Wherever you land on her beliefs and all that, I'm not discussing that. I'm just talking about that's somebody who faced adversity. Right. And was able to take that adversity and make it into something she wanted to make it. Right. She gave herself options. And so yeah, I struggle with that. And I don't know. It's interesting. And we'll talk about this a little bit later, but there's no corroboration to the story. That's where I struggle as a historian. I struggle because I looked and I was trying to find corroboration. I couldn't find it. All right, but we'll get back to some of that later on here.
All right. So the next chapter is faith. We talked about faith a little bit already. Do you have anything specific in there that you wanted to address? I mean, because this does take a certain amount of faith, and the concept he presents is that he describes it's difficult to explain how faith is created, but he argues that it's repetition, that if you repeat something enough to yourself, that subconsciously you'll believe it, and that's how faith is created. And I disagree with that definition of faith, but I understand where he's coming from with, like if you repeat a concept over and over and over, then you believe it, and then it's true for you, and then it's faith. But I look at faith a little differently than that. But what did you think about that definition?
So I think he doesn't just keep it. My Kindle died on my Mac, so I'm going on my phone here. So when he talks about faith, he does say repetition of affirmation of orders to your subconscious mind is the only known method of voluntary development of the emotion of faith, right? So he's very big on subconscious, and there's a lot to be said about the subconscious. We battle it all the time. I mean, there's different beliefs as far as in psychology, but we function the way we function based on the way we were raised, which eventually ends up in the subconscious. And sometimes, you talk about like, why are you really upset about something? You may not be upset at a certain specific thing. There might be a hidden issue. I think we talked about it in one of our books. So he does break down. He goes into this whole thing like faith is this, faith is not, right? So I see your definition of faith where he does mention that, but he says, faith is the basis of all miracles and all mysteries which cannot be analyzed by the rules of science. Okay, that's true, right? He says faith is the only antidote for failure, possibly, right? Faith is the element, the chemical, which when mixed with prayer gives one direct communication with infinite intelligence. I needed him to define what infinite intelligence was. I don't know, did you get a definition for that, what that was?
I mean, it's hard because, there's so many different worldviews. Is he
talking about
religions.
God?
Yeah,
is he talking about?
I think when people speak like this, and we probably have some listeners who,
if we're dead wrong, let us know.
So I don't mean to like offend this belief system, but like I think this is a way of kind of almost a postmodern look of like truth, like. Some people can have whatever, like maybe for you it's Christianity, maybe for you it's Buddhism, maybe for you it's just the universe, maybe for you it's your own self, like, but there is something that you can connect to, and it doesn't matter what you call it. And so I think that's a way of saying, like, basically addressing all religions at once. So without like saying like,
okay,
one specific religion, but like by saying, ultimate intelligence, like, well, maybe for you that's Christianity according to Hill, or maybe for you that's whatever, maybe for you that's the universe, or he talks about the ether and vibrations in the ether. So I think that's just a way of kind of trying to broad brush faith, worldviews, religions, and accommodate all of them, and no matter what you believe.
Interesting. I was just trying to figure it out. I didn't know. So then eventually goes, every one of the foregoing statements is capable of proof. The proof is simple and easily demonstrated. It is wrapped up in the principle of autosuggestion, which you were talking about earlier. Let us center our attention, therefore, upon the subject of self-suggestion, find out what it is and what it is capable of achieving. And then it goes into, I'm reading too much. It is a well-known fact that one comes finally to believe whatever one repeats to oneself, whether the statement be true or false. If a man repeats a lie over and over again, he will eventually accept the lie as truth. Moreover, he will believe it to be the truth. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure in the context of reselling how, or just not just reselling.
No, maybe it's like, I am going to score this week.
No, but not even just, okay, so any element of life, I'm not sure how helpful this is for self-help though, because I understand like you can believe falsehood. I absolutely believe there are people who genuinely believe something that's false, and they may even originally know it's false.
Do you think people can lie to themselves? Like, do you think that like in the deep core, do they believe the lie they created about who they are?
Yeah, absolutely. And
really?
I don't always know, like sometimes it may be, and again, I'm not a psychologist, so I want to be very careful when I talk about certain things, because I know there are different like specific mental disorders, and I know that there are things that are outside of my expertise. So I'm not speaking on any authority here, but I just think like a common example is a person who maybe has an eating disorder, right? And they genuinely believe in their heart that they are overweight or that they are not enough.
Okay, no.
Right? They've now, whether or not that is a chemical thing, I can't speak on that, but I do think that somebody can believe something that's false, genuinely believe it, or there's plenty of examples of people kind of like retroactively creating past events in their life that may have never happened to them, right?
Okay, so that's a great point. I mean, I agree with you. I have friends that have dealt with scenarios like that, and they truly believed like what they believed. Like it didn't matter what evidence you shared, like that was their truth to them. And as a historian, yes, that is very true. I even myself, back in the day, my friends would be like, Orlando, that is not what happened. I'm like, no, that's exactly how it happened. They're like, nope, that is not how it happened. So yeah, okay, I guess you can convince yourself of something that didn't happen, or that you can convince of yourself that something that may not happen can happen.
Yep. Yeah, but then again, is that helpful? So how do you know if that's true? Then if you can believe something,
man, this is such a philosophical podcast. I hope you guys are still listening to us. Appreciate all of you.
But if you can believe something that's false, then what's to prevent? And again, this is just to try and say like, okay, like if I can will myself to be successful, then how do you know you haven't, that the faith you have isn't a lie, right? Like isn't like that you've convinced yourself that this is going to work, or that it has worked, or it's going to work, or whatever you want to think about. Like I will use this principle and it will make me wealthy. How do you know if what he's saying is true? Then maybe all you've done is had faith and convinced yourself of a lie.
Yeah. No, you're right. I don't know what else to say. Like I feel like we're going in circles here.
Yep.
Right? Not that you're doing anything wrong. It's just the idea of that it's a hard concept to understand that like, hey, we can basically trick ourselves into believing that something will happen. And if we do, then it will happen. Right. And maybe we're too much of a naturalist. Like maybe that's our, I don't know. It's hard. And I would say I've lived enough life and seen enough individuals and myself go through scenarios where I thought things were a certain way. I believed things were a certain way. I did things a certain way. And A plus B did not equal C. And that's where my struggle is with this.
Yeah. But then again, it's like, is it because you had a plan B? Did you give up too early? Is it like, so you can't argue the counterfactual. So I think the hard part is somebody could say, well, these principles still would have worked for you if you wouldn't have given up from the gold mine 3 feet away, right? Like maybe you didn't believe enough. Maybe you didn't. So it's really hard to prove or disprove something like this. And it leads us into chapter 4, which is autosuggestion, which basically is kind of an accumulation of everything we've talked about so far of, you know, you can control your subconscious. And one of the big aspects that he says here is with the faith, with those 6 steps, and he goes back to those 6 steps, is you can't just say it dryly. There has to be a certain amount of emotion because your brain will your subconscious will gather things that have strong emotions. And I think there's some truth to the fact that like they've proven without a doubt scientifically that like when something traumatic happens, whether you have extreme emotions, positive or negative, it affects like your ability to remember something. So like the first time you meet the person of your dreams and you have this moment that's so special, maybe you have so much excitement that memory is burned into your mind and it has a different impact on you. Or the same thing if something really terrible happens to you. So I do think that emotions play a strong impact on how our brains are able to retain things or believe things. So there's definitely some truth to that. Again, though, the idea of auto-suggestion is that you can I will be successful. I will be successful. And I think that I don't want to dismiss that because I know there are people who struggle with like insecurity, right? And that might be what they need. They might need to be able to look at themselves in the mirror and say, you know what? I am capable of overcoming this obstacle. I am capable of achieving success.
There's a difference between something that's already true that you're not seeing and something that is an unforeseen truth that you're trying to force yourself to see.
Like I will be a professional basketball player. Like if I started saying that right now.
Correct. Like, you know, I'm Orlando, you know, I have friends. I don't know. Let's say I'm having a rough time. Well, let's say I'm having a rough time, right? Like,
what am I, Orlando? Come on.
I know. I think I'm a nobody, right? So, you know, I say, well, yeah, you know what? I am respected. I am cared. I am loved. Da, 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 da. And I say these things like those are true, right? Those are true. I hope they're true.
Oh, I see what you're saying. So you're saying like you can repeat truths to yourself.
Yeah. And those help. Where I struggle with is if I'm going to be a pro basketball player. Now, at this stage, maybe that's 130 million% not going to happen.
That's not going to happen.
But maybe when I was 14 and I was a point guard on my JV team, maybe.
Yeah, maybe if you'd have implemented the 6 steps.
But then if I only, you know, unless I was Muggsy Bogues or Spud Webb, like chances are that there's not many that can play at the pro level that are 5'8".
Yeah. And then the other thing too is, oh man, I totally lost where I was going with that. That makes for a very engaging podcast, right? When you're like, I'm in mid thought and I lose it.
Oh, it's because you were thinking of what to say. No, I'm joking. So, okay, but I was talking about I could maybe be a pro player if I thought about this when I was 14, but right now it's not going to happen. So, but again, I don't know. It seems like we're just like we are very contrarian in this podcast.
Yeah. But again, I don't want to remove the fact that like these are helpful things in certain ways. Like I believe that specifically for reselling, I think we talk a lot about like things that can impact your whole life. Mm-hmm. But like you can say like and this even goes back to like the 5-second rule. It goes back to so many of the books that we read. Like when you wake up, you could say like, I'm going to get up and I'm going to go to garage sales today. I'm going to list 10 items. I will list 10 and you can make it happen by your thought process, or you can get up and you can have the thought process of like, man, I can't I'm just too lazy. And you can, the way you interpret the world will have drastic impact on your action. So I definitely think there's benefits to writing your goals, being specific, being singularly focused. And I'll be honest, like I know for a fact, like I do well reselling. I'll be able to make money reselling. It's a great part-time job for me, but I don't have it in me to be a multimillionaire reselling. I just don't have that desire. Now, if I were to be 100% like every waking moment,
you need to get up every morning and you need to say that.
But that's the thing. I wouldn't believe that, like because I don't have the desire for it. But I do think like if that was my singular focus, my chances of getting there are way higher. And going back to the 10x rule, if I go even 10 times higher, my chances of getting to the goal that I really want is there, right? So I think I could make significantly more money than I'm currently making reselling if that was my only
maybe it's
focus.
A priority thing. I mean, Think and Grow Rich, but in this book, it's grow rich like wealthy, right? For us, like richness isn't found in wealth.
I got a question for you. So what, and a big part of this kind of requires, even going back to the Thomas Edison thing of like having like, this is the one thing like I will achieve. I don't know. There's things like family wise and spiritually and things like that are my primary focuses in life. But I would say like, I don't know, like if I have one thing that's like, this is the thing that I'm going to be the best at. Do you have anything like that you're like, I'm going to be the best blank? Or I'm going to reach this specific goal?
There was a point in time when I was in education, I'm going to be the best administrator. I will be ahead of school. I will be da-da-da-da. But again, there were curveballs. Like, you know what I mean? Like it didn't matter. I probably mentally, I know I said it to myself multiple times. I always told myself like, I'm going to be different than everybody else. I'm going to, turn things around. I'm going to make this happen, blah, 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 blah. But there were circumstances that were out of my control that didn't allow some of those things to happen. Right. So yeah, there are point in times. When I was in school, like I definitely was like, I'm going to be the best basketball player on the court. Didn't happen. But yeah, there was that. But that's what I mean. It's
because sometimes I'm almost jealous of people who have like that. Like,
but I think there needs to be self-awareness. Like that. As I get older, I'm very big on self-awareness. I think
dedication, delusion, right? Like,
yeah, I think it, and it's a hard one. I think, it's interesting. I was watching somebody the other day. They're pursuing a career on something, and they've been doing it for 10 years. And it was my boy Gary V. So somebody was talking to him, and I think she was trying to be like a book writer or something. And for 10 years, and she just could never get the sales, but she really believed in it. And he had asked her like, "Hey, have you been shooting YouTubes of yourself and being out there on social media?" And she said no. And he's like, "Well, you clearly have the skill to do that. That may be the reason you're not achieving what you want to do." And I thought that's pretty interesting, because after 10 years, a lot of us would have been like, okay, obviously this is not what I'm supposed to do. But it goes back to that principle early on, which I think was important, that seeking wise counsel. Right. And so I think there comes a place where like, yes, you should drive and you should have desire. Like, I'm going to be the best. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. But it needs to be self-awareness. And sometimes those that you respect and you hold high as far as in esteem, because they know what they're talking about, they should give you wise counsel. I'm not, I am a big believer in not caring about what people think, but I'm also a big believer that there are certain people that you should care about what they think because they've gone down that road and they know more than you do.
That's good.
Right? Is that, I feel like I just contradicted myself.
No, I mean, I think that's good. I think it's fair. Do you have anything else you want to add to this before we get to our education chapter?
Yeah.
Specialized knowledge.
Specialized knowledge. So I think it's interesting because he says here, let us here offer suggestions for the effective use of concentration. When you begin to carry out the first of the 6 steps, which instructs you to fix in your own mind the exact amount of money you desire. So we're going back to about chapter 1. Hold your thoughts on the amount of money by concentration or fixation of attention with your eyes closed until you can actually see the physical appearance of the money. Do this at least once each day. As you go through these exercises, follow the instructions given in the chapter on faith and see yourself actually in possession of the money. And then he goes on, absolute faith and acts upon those orders. Although the orders often have been to be presented over and over again through repetition before they are interpreted by the subconscious mind, following the preceding statement, consider the possibility of playing a perfectly legitimate trick on your subconscious mind by making it believe, because you believe it, that you must have the amount of money you are visualizing, that this money is already waiting your claim, that the subconscious mind must hand over to you practical plans for acquiring the money which is yours. Whew. That's a struggle with that.
Yeah, I mean, I do too, but I know there are people who you know, they genuinely believe that, and I'm not saying that I don't believe that that's true, but if you believe that that's true, like, you know, I disagree. You probably disagree with me, but you know, I think that's okay. I think that's okay that people have those different opinions on that. I have a hard part, like he talks about, and again, this is just a worldview thing, so I'm not saying that, like, you know, whatever.
This is the best level of review ever.
But, you know, like he talks specifically in that chapter, in the chapter before, about, like, you know, you put out vibrations into the ether and then you attract those things to you. But what is
the ether?
I think it's just like the, I don't know, spirit world or the universe. Again, it's like one of those. But I think the idea, though, I do like it. Even goes back to 5-second rule. And that was just the most recent book we did. So that's why it's fresh in my mind of, okay, your subconscious, like, I'll give you an example. I was playing this video game, and there's scientific evidence to prove this. I was a kid. I was like junior high. I was playing this video game, and I could not beat this level because the puzzle was too difficult for me, right? I was trying to play it, couldn't figure it out, went to sleep. In my dream...
Was it Zelda?
It was Zelda.
Nice. I've had the same scenario.
Ocarina of Time. In my dream, I saw the solution to the puzzle. I woke up, and I'm like, there's no way. And I did it, and it worked. And there's a lot of evidence to prove that when you sleep, right? Like when you learn something, your brain actually like locks it in when you're sleeping. And so there's certain things you can do like before bed, and your brain processes. So sometimes when you're awake, your brain actually is like so full of information, it can't process it all. When you're sleeping, it can process it. So there is an element of your brain might already have solutions and plans for you that you're not thinking about yet. And so I can see how, like, okay, if you already are saying like, I will do this thing, then your brain subconsciously could be processing things that you're just, the clutter of your mind can't think of, and it could start to give you those things, right? Like 5-second rule, you're walking down, you see the gym, like, you know, like subconsciously, this is the thing I need to do to achieve this goal, even if you've never thought about joining a gym, right? Like, so there's certain things that you can do, I think, to influence and help make your brain work for you. I'm not saying like you attract the things to you, but I think that you can make your brain, our brains are so much more powerful than we realize. And so there's probably an element of truth of, if you can get your subconscious working for you, or whether it's subconscious or just a deeper part of your brain working for you, it can help provide solutions to problems that you couldn't otherwise solve if your brain didn't think it had to solve it. But when you're singularly focused on something, you think about it constantly, your brain is going to be processing that stuff and helping offer solutions. I think that's true.
Yeah, I think so. It's weird that even though we're in the year 2020, I mean, then again, I never thought...
We're talking about Zelda Ocarina of Time.
Yeah, no, it's still an amazing... Zelda's amazing. But the idea that we haven't figured out how to unlock that.
Yeah, you know? I mean, I know that the numbers... The old wives' tales will use 10% of your brain.
Yeah.
I think the numbers have fluctuated up and down over the years. But it's so crazy how capable our brains are, and how little of it we actually are able to use fully. And I mean, that just goes to show, like, there's probably a lot of truths to some of these things that maybe the rationale of getting there may be wrong in these books or other books, but there's elements of like, but these things actually do work. We just don't necessarily know why.
Yeah, I see that. But speaking of that, let's get to the chapter on education.
I love that one.
So, all right. So when he says knowledge will not attract money. Okay, true. Unless it is organized and intelligently directed through practical plans of action into the definite end of accumulation of money.
Look at the one quote I have for this chapter. It's the exact same one. We're on sync here.
That's why we're PHP.
Yeah.
All right. Now, he does say later on, and I'll add to it, he says, many people make the mistake of assuming that because Henry Ford had but little schooling, he's not a man of education. Those who make this mistake do not know Henry Ford, nor do they understand the real meaning of the word educate. That word is derived from the Latin word educo. Did I say that right? I haven't done Latin in a while. Meaning to educe, to draw out, to develop from within. So two things. One is, yes, the application of knowledge is wisdom, which is interesting because he's talking about wisdom, but then earlier on, and we didn't cover this, but he talks about how wisdom alone isn't good enough to make sound decisions.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Right? But I think it's 100% true. Like, how many people do you know that have a head full of knowledge, but like...
Yeah, and that might even be the difference between like knowledge and wisdom. But yeah, I mean, I love this concept of the knowledge itself doesn't do anything unless you organize it and put it into action and then utilize it well, right? And I think that's good. And I think that's some fault with some people is they think just by knowing something, it's enough, but you've got to use what you know, right?
Yeah, and it's same thing with reselling. Like, you could watch all the YouTube you want. You could listen to all the Purist podcasts, and we advise you to listen to us multiple times per episode. You could do whatever you want. But unless you are organizing that and putting into action, like getting even this level up review, right? There's a lot of things that we're like, and there's a lot of things we thought were good. And you can take some of these and you can take action by organizing it and making good on it, right? But if you don't do that, then it's not going to do anything. And if we're talking about reselling, it's not going to make you money, right? So it's very, very important. Now, I do like what he said about Henry Ford. And I think we're going to read a book in the future called Grit.
Yeah.
It's a heavy book, but one thing I learned, and in the reselling community, there's a lot of people. I know some people that are very well off that never even finished high school, and I really believe, and we're speaking as educators, so it's kind of strange when I say that I 100% believe you can be educated and never have gone to college. You can be educated and never have finished high school, right? But there's a different road to get there, right? Some of it is through a lot of practical implementation of the same thing over and over and over again, right? When we read that book, Great in the Future, it talks about like in order to become an expert in something, you have to have at least, I think it's like 5,000 hours.
10,000.
Is it 10,000? It's a lot of time, right? But you notice that resellers that have reached a certain level, it's very rare, unless you're watching a guru, that they'll just pick up reselling and they'll be instant millionaires, and they keep those millions and they keep expanding and growing. It's a rarity. Most people, it took some time, it took some work, it took some effort to get to that place.
Yeah, that's good. And I think too, one thing I think he dismisses a little bit the idea of like almost liberal arts, and I agree to an extent. But I'm a little classical in my education approach on this.
Liberal arts give you the skills that you can't get anywhere else.
That's what I was going to say. So I think that there is a benefit to going to college, to getting a liberal arts degree. And I'm not necessarily saying you have to go to college, but I think a benefit of that, even though liberal arts itself isn't like, hey, but that's not going to help you with computer science. So that's not going to help you as a lawyer. That's not going to but what it does do is it teaches you, and he does mention this, it teaches you how to learn and acquire knowledge and then to use that knowledge. And so I think that when you have general knowledge, and it doesn't just mean, because he uses the example of, Henry Ford and like asking him questions. I think that was who he gave the example of like, well, how many troops did the British send to America? It's like, well, I don't have that fact, but I can ask somebody to give me that fact for me. I know my business, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think what I've discovered is most people who go to college get a degree, and then when they get to the job force, they learn 90% of what they need to be successful in the job on the job, but what they learned at college allowed them to be more successful, right? Like it wasn't like they might not have learned the program that they need to use. They might not have learned the specific, but what they did learn is how to think and how to process. And you can do that without going to college. Like you don't necessarily need college, but like, that's why I'm a fan of like learning Greek or Latin and reading classics and reading, because those things help give you a sense, like a deeper root that gives you a broader, basically a foundation to build on, because you'll learn those things. Like when you get a new job somewhere, with the first 6 months, it's all training. You can learn to do those things on the job if you've already learned how to learn well and think well.
Yeah, and it's a great point. I mean, that's why, obviously we're educators and obviously we're going to have that standpoint, but there's a difference between going to school and learning how to go to school and learn.
Yeah.
Right? Because, to be a lifelong learner takes practice. It's not something that, this is why, I really think that's why there's a divide in like, there's some people that can like figure things out really quick. And for a reason, they either end up with a talent or gift, but somewhere they figured out how to break down information.
Yep.
Right. And so, but again, I even look at my own son, like, I don't think my son's going to go to college. I hope he does, but I'm not going to 100% push him.
Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with not, or going to a trade school. And specifically, if you're going for like specific knowledge, you're going to get more of the specific knowledge you need in that field. Like I'll give you an example. So my degree is in English. My master's is in education technology, but I learned by having those degrees, it taught me a lot of things about teaching and thinking and learning and all of those things. But my passion, one of my big passions is videography. Now I'm learning motion graphics. When I got kind of thrust into the video role at my previous school, I literally took a couple of online courses through like lynda.com, I think is what it was, or lydia.com.
Oh my goodness, I remember those.
And it was like 20 hours of just me and a computer doing the projects.
Pre-Udemy?
Yeah, I learned so much. Like it was incredible. And I know a lot of people that go to school to be a videographer. They go to school to get into cinema or film. And then I know people who just learned on YouTube on their own. And the people who learn on their own and get the experience and go and get an apprenticeship and actually work can actually sometimes come out further ahead. And so and give another example. And I got my associate's degree in criminal justice. And it was kind of funny because one of the professors of the class said, just so you guys know, like you'd be better off getting a business degree or a general degree if you wanted to become like an officer or a captain in the police force, because we're going to teach you everything you need to know about criminal justice as a police officer, but learning how to be a business manager and manage people, that takes a different kind of skill. Right. And so it kind of goes to show like having a general knowledge, you'll learn the specifics either at a trade school or you can learn those things online or you can learn them in the field. But having a general knowledge is good. And one thing that I really loved on this chapter is he talked about the idea of paid versus free education. And he makes the comment that like he paid for some college classes, some online, it wasn't online at the time. It was like by mail classes that he was doing. And basically the fact that he paid for it, he decided he didn't want to do it and he stopped doing the courses, but he was still getting the bills because he legally signed up to take this course and to pay the bills. And he's like, well, if I'm paying for it, I might as well do it. And it motivated him to do it. And he actually makes this comment that he thinks one of the problems with like a free education system like public schools have is, although there's many benefits to it, is there's not always buy-in from the kids. And I think there's something true. Like if it doesn't cost you anything, you might not appreciate what you're doing. But if it costs you something, and I'm not advocating like charging kids for schooling at all. But I think there is like, I have a friend who he came from Nigeria. He had malaria as a kid. His legs were severely, affected by the disease. And I think it was malaria. It may have been something else. I'm sorry. I don't remember the exact, but he lived like a mile away from a village that a lady from America came and was teaching English. And he knew that if he could learn English, it would open up opportunities for him. And so he, not exaggerating, would crawl, because he didn't have access to use of his legs, would crawl the mile every day to school and back. And it cost him but he appreciated the school that he got. Right. Whereas how many students, like I have so many students, and again, part of it is just our culture where it's like, oh, I have to come to school. And it's like, because they don't realize, because it doesn't cost them anything, the value isn't there. And I think that there's something true about that. Like I paid, it was only $15 for that. I think it's pronounced, somebody corrected us, it's Udemy.
No, it's Udemy.
Udemy?
Yeah.
Okay. So
not Udemy, it's Udemy.
Oh, somebody said it was Udemy. But anyway,
unless I'm wrong and I'm the dummy.
But like, okay, so I paid only $15 for the course. That's not a lot, but it's something I want to do. It cost me something I'm going to move forward. Same thing with my master's. That cost $20,000, right? And like I paid for it. I'm going to get the most out of it because it cost me something. And so I think that even with reselling, there's benefit to that. if what you're doing costs you something, whether it's, and we give our content for free, right? So hopefully this is not us bashing this idea.
It cost them having to listen to over an hour of this level
True,
up.
yeah. So like, if it doesn't cost you anything, like a lesson to learn, or like I'm gonna learn accounting, or I'm gonna learn bookkeeping, and I'm gonna buy this software, and it's very expensive, but it's gonna level up my reselling, as opposed to, oh, this is a free thing. I could use this free worksheet, or I could use this free tax program, and it might not mean as much to you. But if you paid $500 for this tax program, you're probably more likely to be inputting the numbers every day, because it's like, man, I'm paid for this. I want to use it. And so I think there's something to be said about, if your work costs you something, or a tool costs you something, you might be more likely to use it.
Agreed. All right.
Now the part you want to talk about.
Well, okay. So here's a few things. So as a podcast, sometimes we need to pivot. And Mike and I are going to have to pivot. If people are like, what are they talking about? So a few things. So a lot of you know, or you don't know. So I do have a master's in history. So I'm not a professional historian. You're a professional historian if you have a PhD. But I'm an amateur historian, I guess you would say. And historians ruin a lot of things. Historians tell you things about people you don't want to know. Historians break down facts, and you're like, what? That's not how it happened, right? You're like, oh, I'd rather believe the way I was told in school.
It's like someone ruining the magic trick.
Yeah, no, that's what historians do. So I struggled with this book, because the reason I struggle with this book, as I'm going through this book, there's a lot of misinformation historically, like from his discussion about Columbus, from his discussion about Booker T. Washington, from his discussion about these individuals. I'm like, what is going on? Like, why is there a miss? And then he talks about talking to Andrew Carnegie, right? And Andrew Carnegie, but it's pronounced Carnegie, but we'll go with Andrew Carnegie. Can we go with that one?
Is that the more popular?
I don't know. And as I'm reading, because I'm like, oh, that's interesting, because I've never heard of, he's a titan of industry speaking with Napoleon Hill. Like, that was new, right? And I've studied the lives of John D. Rockefeller extensively. I've studied the lives of J.P. Morgan. I've studied, Andrew Carnegie. And this guy never came up. And I'm like, what's going on, right? And then I started doing a little more digging, and he talks in here about Woodrow Wilson, and then I'm like, wait, what? So going back to the very chapter one, he starts his intro, right? In the very, very beginning. If I go to the intro, he starts with this whole discussion about, he met with Andrew Carnegie, and he spoke with, I need to get up to the mic. He said, this book contains the secret after having been put to a practical test by thousands of people in almost every walk of life. It was Mr. Carnegie's idea that the magic formula which gave him a stupendous fortune ought to be placed within reach of people who did not have time to investigate how men make money. And it was his hope that I might test and demonstrate the soundness of the formula through the experience of men and women in every calling. He believed the formula, and he goes on about his discussions. So I do some research, and the very prominent historians who study Andrew Carnegie say there is no evidence of him and Carnegie ever meeting, and that there's no evidence of him and Woodrow Wilson ever talking.
Yeah, and even beyond that.
But let me finish.
Go for it.
So the argument that Napoleon Hill said at one time was that everything got burned up in a building. Okay, now there is a link below to, I think, is well done journalism about his life that we'll link below. You read all of it from point A to point B, and then you tell us, like, or are we off on this? So I'm looking through all this, and as a historian, whenever something happens, you can't qualify it as true unless there is corroborating evidence from multiple sources, right? Not just a person, right? Because if you think of memoirs, what do people talk about when they write their memoirs? If I were to write my memoir, why would you question my memoir?
Okay, so two things. One, a memoir actually is something that talks about the time more than it talks about the person.
Okay, all right.
From a literary standpoint, but like a biography.
Yeah, but
okay, so there's
historian. Okay, from a historian's perspective.
So you're an unreliable narrator, right? Like I'm only getting your perspective on something, unless it's corroborated by other people.
Correct. Right. So there should have been like other accounts, like Carnegie should have had something, and Rockefeller or JP Morgan, President Wilson should have had, like, there's nothing. Right. And some people have argued, and you read the article, that none of this happened, which is, and it was terrible for me, because after reading, this, I'm looking at this, I'm like, what? Okay, so what's going on here? And then here's another lesson in this. So we always talk about this all the time. Like, we always joke about gurus, right? And I'm a big believer that if somebody's a guru, there needs to be validity to their guru-ness, right? That, hey, if you're someone I'm going to look to, that you're claiming that you're a millionaire and you made all this money, then that's what you need to demonstrate. Not saying you got to show me your Lambo, but there has to be something
Evidence.
there has to be evidence of that. And here, it's interesting. If you read into the life of Napoleon Hill, there's no riches. The riches are gained from his selling of these ideas, but not the implementation of these ideas.
Yep. And
And so I really struggled with that. And with the fact that I couldn't find corroborating evidence. Mike and I talked about this, and we struggle with this a little bit. Like, how do we do this level up review? Right. Luckily, we can cancel our orders on Amazon because, right, they haven't arrived. What do you think about all this, Mike?
Yeah, I mean, there's that, and there's also like other character issues potentially with them. But and I want to just say this, like,
and again, we're not going into the logical fallacy of like, hey, somebody who has bad character can't discuss truth.
Yeah, no, for sure. But I think I want to at least acknowledge the fact that even, let's just say this is all made up, right? Everything that he says, all of the evidence that he gives, let's just pretend it's all just one big metaphor, or one, like he's using fiction, because you can use fiction.
He was a great writer.
Yeah. So that may be true. And I think there's an argument to be made that just because the story itself is wrong or fiction, that the truths behind it or the principles aren't accurate or can't work. And so I want to say, like, it, even if everything he's made up, everything he said as far as like this story isn't actually true, that doesn't necessarily in and of itself mean the principles aren't true. But I do think that gives a red flag of, but if that's what you're basing the principles on, as opposed to, because I mean, I'll be honest, I've done that with like students. I'm teaching a lesson, and sometimes I'll make something up, and I usually phrase it like, I had this friend, I'm not saying it's me, wink, wink. And I give this like elaborate made up story, and like, and it proves the point I'm trying to make about whatever I'm trying to do. Right. And then kids are like, did that really happen to you? I'm like, I'm not saying it happened to me. And I do that because, one, I'm trying not to lie. I'm using fiction to teach a truth. But so there is an element of somebody can use something made up to teach something that's true. But I think if that's what you're basing it on,
that's called fiction.
Right. But if that's what you're basing it on, that this principle will work because this thing happened, and we put into question, like, well, maybe that thing didn't happen. Like, are these principles true? And maybe that's up to you. You got to decide, like, do these principles work? Do they work for you? Is it something that can, I mean, hey, if these things can help you, then I'm not going to say like the fact that he made it up, whether he did or not, like dismiss it. It doesn't work. Like, it might work, but certain elements of it might work, or maybe it's still beneficial to you. But I do think that we got to approach it with like but let's be logical, and let's think like, maybe there's some red flags, and we should question things. And there's nothing wrong. You should question everything.
But let's look at the previous authors, right, that we've read, right? Grant Cardone, Tim Ferriss, Mel Robbins, Admiral, I can't remember his name.
But there's arguments to be made that some of them, like, I mean, we like, for instance, and again, I'm not saying this is necessarily true, but there's evidence, or people who would make the argument that even like Grant Cardone, that his success is less in the fact that he's selling things than selling the concept of selling, right? Like, or Tony Robbins, who teaches people.
But he has real estate numbers to show. Like, I don't even want to go into that other world. I just want to go about, let's just talk about our authors. What we can say about all our authors is that we've read beforehand, like, there is validating truth that what they discussed, they were actually able to make it happen for themselves. Not everybody's going to be able to do that, right? I mean, we can apply the principles. I wish I could be like Tim Ferriss and work 4 hours and travel the world. Like, I wish, right? And maybe it's because I haven't applied myself, right? Being a real estate mogul like Grant Cardone would be awesome. That I'd be a lot of pressure, but it'd be fun, right? Mel Robbins, right? 5-second rule. She has her own TV show, right? That changed her life, right? Admiral McRaven, right? Make your bed, the principles of discipline and dedication. That all helps. I'm trying to look at everybody up there. And, we had The Richest Man in Babylon, but that was more like, that was storytelling, right? To arrive to the truth. But with all of those, there was validation based on the authority, right? That these individuals had one scenario that in their own personal life, and people can go back and go, yep, that's right. Regardless of what you believe, whether you believe Grant Cardone, makes more money now because of his selling of his programs, which Grant Cardone, you should come on our show sometime. That'd be great. We appreciate it if he's ever going to listen. But that's the case, right? I mean, it's even I'll even put it to the case of, crazy here, like Jordan Belfort, Wolf of Wall Street.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever you think of Jordan Belfort, right? He served time, blah, blah, blah. That guy understood Wall Street. He understood how to make millions. Didn't do it the right way, but he knew how to do that, right? Different scenario here, right? I see too much of reaching into. I have a hard time when I'm trying to read a story that's supposed to be factual, and then I find out that it's not true at all, or not even close to ever happening.
But to play devil's advocate here, what if? And again, I'm not trying to smear his name.
Well, where does this podcast go right now?
What if Napoleon Hill? What if the thing he believed? What if his goal? What if the thing that he was trying to achieve was, I am going to become famous and either make lots of money or sell this idea of something that I made up stories? Then he was successful. We don't know.
But we won't know because the Napoleon Hill Foundation doesn't provide access to his archives. So I see, as a historian, that's a problem. So,
but he's famous right now for.
Oh no, he's big. Right now, we're probably going to get multiple thumbs down right now. Let's just be real.
But maybe that was his goal, right? A lot of people. I know. Again, I'm not saying okay, Napoleon Hill is equivalent to a cult leader. But think of people like that. People who are, all they want is fame and notoriety, right? That's what their desire is, and they get it, and they reach it, and even if they have to do something wrong to get there, maybe that was his thing. Maybe it was I am going to become. People will be talking about me for 100 years. He was successful. So does that then, you know what I mean? If that was his goal.
Okay, we're gonna end it with this. There are truths, like we said, that you can always find. Right? If your truth is truth, right? Regardless of the vehicle, truth is truth. Okay? So you can if Think and Grow Rich has been great for you, then keep applying those principles, right? If it has worked for you, we'd love to know. Right? Because regardless of the author, there may be principles in there that are super legit and applicable. But as far as Pure Hustle Podcast goes, we're going to close the book on Think and Grow Rich.
Yeah, it's not the book for us.
And we're going to pivot to another book. And we apologize to all of you.
Yeah. And again, I don't want people to say well, you didn't give it a fair shot. I will probably read the whole thing. I just don't want to, I don't know if I could do another 2 episodes or another episode, because I feel I understand the principle. Even the 5-second rule, I feel okay, once you understand the principle, how far can you really go with it? You're just giving more anecdotal evidence. So I'm not going to say hey, I didn't give it a fair shot. I will give this book a fair shot. And I think you should decide yourself, give it a fair shot. But as far as the podcast goes, I think maybe we can provide even more value with a different book.
And that's our goal. Our goal is to provide value. Yeah. And I think if we pivot and choose a different book, we'll be able to provide more practical value.
Yeah.
So always trying to keep it real. Hope you stick with us. Hope you appreciate us keeping it real. And looking forward to our next Level Up review. And I hope you are too. And with that being said, make sure to be real,
be relevant,
and be reselling. Peace.